intervention plan, although I've asked for this one on multiple occasions. There was recently an incident where she acted out and was then suspended. What can I do to resolve this issue so it doesn't happen again? I knew we could.
Under that circumstance, I would definitely contact my case teacher. If your child is SED and your child is having behavior issues at school and it has resulted in a suspension, I would definitely call an IEP meeting and have the team talk about a behavior intervention plan. A lot of people don't necessarily understand what function the behavior intervention plan has. It really is about the student, but it is a guide for the adults. It is a guide on how they're to react and the strategies and interventions that they need to try at the point of misbehavior. So I would definitely contact my case teacher and see about the team discussing putting in a behavior intervention plan in place.
What about programs for high-functioning Asperger children as they prepare for college?
I'll try. Well, that's a loaded question. The students on the spectrum who are high-functioning are going to be really in the general education setting if they're preparing for college. There's not a particular program other than following the course of study, working with your child's school, working with those teachers, and if specialized instruction is needed for those students to reach some of those goals, then I would say reconvene the IEP team meeting if you're having concerns about that. Let me just think for just a minute. Yeah, the transition plan, that's right. Well, that's like the biggest part of the IEP. Well, you can tell my brain's not working this evening. You would want to look at that component. There are post-secondary goals and outcomes on that part of the IEP that lists what you want your child to do. If you want your child to be college bound, then you want to have things listed on that plan that are going to foster and meet those goals. If you feel that some of those things are on there, but it's not, those goals are not being met, again, go ahead and reconvene the IEP team. If you have not heard of what a transition plan is, I would say quickly convene your IEP team and talk about that part.
When you get to the college or university, particularly if it's one that receives federal assistance, once your child graduates from an IEP, when they get to that college or university, they can receive something like Section 504 services. And so what you want to look for is they have different names at UNCP, because I work there, it's called DSS, or Disability Support Services. And so when you get to the campus, the student, because they're an adult, and so they have to go and apply for those services themselves. They also have to meet the criteria that are outlined by the university. It is a Section 504 plan, but the university has a different set of standards that they have to meet than what the school meets. But the fact that your child already has an IEP, take the most recent copy of that plan so that you can kind of help establish that this was a child that was already receiving some assistance and receiving some accommodations at the school system, and that will help. It doesn't guarantee, it doesn't mean that they're automatically going to approve it, but it helps you as you go through the process at the university level. And because Section 504 is federal legislation, if it's a college or a university that receives federal assistance, then they have to adhere to the Section 504 guidelines. But just keep in mind that they have a different set of guidelines and a process, and because your student is now an adult, that student needs to go into that disability support office. They may, different groups call it different things, but ask specifically about that if they have that service at the school. Like I've had students in my class that receive things like where I have to find another student to take notes for that child, for that young person, I'll say, for that young person in my course. I've had to give them a separate setting to take their tests. I've had to give them extended time. So just find out what that particular department is called on that university and then go through their process. They're not going to come and seek you out like we're going to be looking for you at the public level. And they're also not going to, you're not going to have the school district, we're not going to call up and say, okay, we're transferring the records for Natasha Scott, she's EC and she needs to get services here. So as an adult, the student will need to go in and apply for those services. And I would even add to that, and then I'm going to hush, is even if you have a student, if you have a current CCS student who's taken a college course and needs some accommodations, same deal, you still need to go to that disability support services or whatever it is and still apply for those services in order to receive them at the university.
What do we do if a child is allowed to use electronic devices in school, but the school has open Wi-Fi? What do we do if a child is allowed to use electronic devices in school, but the school has open Wi-Fi?
I think the question has to do with the filters within our individual programs within our Wi-Fi. I do know that even though it's open in terms of they have a guest network and then they have a secure network, they do have monitoring tools in place to try to monitor the content that students are accessing. So if you have individual concerns about your child accessing the Wi-Fi at school due to them accessing content that you do not want them to access, I guess that first question would be if they're they call them a BYOD, like bring your own device schools, then you do not have to send a device with that individual student. If that's something that's required as part of the day-to-day instruction within those classrooms, the school will make a device available for those individual students to access the internet. But when you talk about open Wi-Fi access, it is just not open to everything that's out there, because I've been in the technology department and I've seen the types of things that they flag in their system due to certain words that are typed in on the internet. They have a flagging system, and I do know that they're also working on enhancing that, because I was just over at technology about a week ago, and they're trialing new programs, because what they really want to do is they want students to have maximum access to all the information that's available out there. And sometimes the way that filters are set up, sometimes you have a bad word embedded in a regular word, and sometimes it filters and does not allow students to reach the content that they're trying to reach, and so they're working on some more advanced filters. But if it's a bring your own device school, that's definitely up to you as a parent.
My daughter's IEP states that they can provide alternative assignments. 2 months into the school year, I'm moving over here because I have to get something. 2 months into the school year, not one teacher has tried this, even though she is not completing assignments that they assign. And I think the last part of it is, what should I do?
I'll take it.
No, I thought Susan was going to do that.
The first advice that I would have as a parent, if you feel like, I think the question may have been, it says they can. Well, typically, if you read the IEP, it's on the section where they talk about modifications and accommodations, there's a little section called specifications, which tells who, what, when, where, why. And so that's the first thing I would look at, is how are the assignments supposed to be modified, or the grades supposed to be modified. It should be very specific. And if in that section it's very broad, if like they just put modified assignments or modified grades, I would be requesting an IEP meeting to get more clarity on what exactly that means, because it's a very broad term. The other thing that I would ask them to do at that meeting, which I don't think is too much to ask for, is to say, can you bring me a copy of a standard assignment and a modified assignment? If a parent contacts my office and says, my child has modified assignments and they're not being modified, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the specifications section, and then I'm going to ask for a regular assignment and a modified assignment. And then at the IEP meeting, you can have some discussions. If it's only one specific teacher, if they're like high school or in elementary school, your first discussion may happen as part of just a parent-teacher conference where you ask that specific question. If you don't feel like you got the clarity that you desire based on what your concerns are, then the IEP meeting would be the next step, because I really think sometimes the specifications section of the IEP is just too broad, and I think people interpret, my interpretation of what a modified assignment is may be different from Bobby's or Nancy's or Natasha's. And so we always want to make sure that we are very specific on what exactly that means and what that looks like.
My daughter's IEP states that they can provide, whoa, I just read that one, sorry. What are the options in terms of a fifth grader with mild ID when he or she transitions to middle school? What if he or she falls between two options offered, ID mild and ID mod? What if she falls between the mild and the mod, and what's her transition? What are her transitions to middle school?
It's truly individualized, and so you have to look at the needs of the kids. And a lot of times we have students who, even though they fall in the moderate ID range academically, socially they're very much in the mild ID range, and they need to be with higher peers or more social situations. So you really need to work with your IEP team to design something that works for that child. So sometimes the student may spend part of the day in the regular classroom, say PE, in a social situation, part of the day maybe academically and reading for the moderate class, and then design something else. So they have to design the whole day to fit the needs of the child. And so it's hard to say in general, other than you just got to look at each child, each IEP when they're transitioning to sixth grade.
My child cannot handle more than 30 to 45 minutes of homework. How do I get this in writing and get it approved?
Modified assignments. And to just sort of to piggyback off of what Ruben said, I was actually in a personal situation where my child had modified assignments, and I saw the same work coming home that was going home to everybody else. And what the teacher was doing was modifying it after the fact. She would see what she could do, and then she would grade based on what she was able to accomplish. And I don't know if that's truly the correct way to interpret modified assignments, but she didn't want it to be different for her. She wanted her to at least give it a shot, and then she would sort of do a combination of modified grading, modified assignment, or she would have a conversation with her after she turned it in. If she missed everything, she would go back and say, did you understand the instructions, or something like that. So sometimes things are, the child's given the opportunity at first, and then it's modified after the fact. If homework is happening too long, that would definitely be a time where modified assignments would be a lower number of things, and you would have to, it would be helpful if you knew what subjects were causing your child, more difficulty or giving them a harder time to get through. And really it's going to be an individual thing of talking to the teacher and saying, helping the teacher understand, my child can't be spending 3 and 4 hours a night doing this.
What kind of guidance does Cumberland County Schools offer for parents of children with intellectual disabilities in terms of selection and implementation of instructional accommodations and assistive technology with reference to the Common Core standards? And how will the Common Core be extended to make them relevant for students with intellectual disabilities? What kind of guidance does Cumberland County Schools offer for parents of children with intellectual disabilities in terms of selection and implementation of instructional accommodations and assistive technology with reference to the Common Core standards? And how will the Common Core be extended to make them relevant for students with intellectual disabilities?
I actually think that question goes back to the response that Ruben gave.
I'm going to
not going to try to paraphrase for Ruben, but as I understand that question, I think that he covered it earlier with the question where he was explaining that Common Core is an acronym for our standard course of study. And so as you went through that explanation earlier of having a standard course of study and an occupational course of study, that there's not like some kids that are doing the North Carolina standard course of study and then some that are doing Common Core. Common Core is it. That is the standard course of study. And so all those normal things that you do for kids, whether it's a 504 plan, whether it's a EC kid, it depends on what the individual needs of those students are. And so if it's a special ed kid, when you build that IEP and you put those services in place based on those child's strengths as well as those deficits, then you've covered making sure that they get everything that they need in through the Common Core, or whether they're on the occupational course of study.
But that doesn't come
To me,
into
that
play,
question
right?
sounds pretty similar to,
The
kind of similar.
occupational course of study doesn't come in until high school. If
Yes.
you don't have a high schooler, you wouldn't know that.
So there are we have a couple different types of diplomas that students receive. And one of those diplomas is the OCS, or the occupational course of study. I don't know if anyone else wants to add, but to me, it sounds like along the same lines of the question that was asked earlier.
And I'll just kind of reiterate, ultimately, when and you're probably going to get tired of hearing this, because when we have this discussion, a lot of the responses, everything that we do is so individualized to those, to specific students. So, when we're asked a question of, is there a common set of accommodations that you would recommend, or is there a common set of assistive technology tools? And it really is, we can't really give you a common set of accommodations or things that every student needs to access the Common Core, to access curriculum as a whole. You have to base it on that individual student needs. Not every student needs extended time. Not every student needs dictate and describe, or needs a co-writer or some other sort of assistive technology. So a lot of that's going to be based on that individual student and how they're performing within the curriculum. From a teacher standpoint, what the teachers are doing is they're digesting what the new standards are, and they're ensuring that those students are receiving the standards based on what the standard course of study are. And I think that's a point of discussion that we have with DPI all the time, in the sense that, really in North Carolina, again, you have 2 courses of study, and 99% of our population is on the standard course of study. And so what we try to do is work with our teachers to ensure that the delivery is to the extent that students are getting the same information, maybe in a different delivery format. Because ultimately, whether or not you're identified with a mild intellectual disability or a student with high functioning autism, the standards are the exact same. And what we're finding is that with the deletion of certain alternative assessments like the Extend 2 in coming years, is that all students are going to be held to that specific standard, which is the general curriculum.
I could ask you about 10 questions on that, but they're mine, and so I'll bet.
Last year, the teacher had very good strategies to keep my son on task, and communication was great. This year is very different. I do not feel I'm getting through to the teacher. What should I do?
I always think it's important to first talk to your teacher, because I think everybody deserves the opportunity to be faced and to be said, I have a problem, let's see what we can do, we can work it out. But if that doesn't work, you have an administrator in your building that you need to talk to, and you need to say to that person, I have concerns, I've approached this teacher, I've done this, I've done that, it hasn't worked out, can we work something out? And typically that solves the problem, but there are other measures in place that you can go other places, such as, higher up, but usually it works if you just hit those 2 areas.
So start with the teacher.
Start with the teacher.
There is a child that is in my son's self-contained classroom. He can be very violent, and my child is afraid. What can I do besides talk with the teacher?
First of all, I would, after I had a parent-teacher conference with that teacher, and just talk to them about the specifics on maybe why your child is afraid. You may want to have a conversation with the teacher and the principal. Unfortunately, in some of our separate setting classrooms, we do have children in there who have some behaviors that are maybe unnerving or uncomfortable for other children. But I think there are strategies and interventions that can be put into place. But I think first and foremost, the teacher and the principal probably needs to be aware that your child is uncomfortable in that setting and see what kind of plan they can come up with.
My son is in a self-contained ID Mile classroom. Why is there so little co-teaching between the regular ed teacher and the special ed teacher? Now, I don't know what so little means, so. Is there a required amount? Can someone address it that way, or?
At the elementary level, I'm going to get into like teacher licensure, I guess. At the elementary level, if a child is served in an exceptional children's classroom, that exceptional children's teacher is licensed to teach all subjects in all areas to that individual student. And so there's not a requirement for a general education teacher or another teacher to co-teach with them. When you talk about separate setting refers to the fact that they're going to spend the vast majority, if not all of their day, with only students with disabilities. And so in that particular instance, that teacher who's in that classroom with them is delivering all of that subject matter to them. Now, different schools do it differently. They may have like an instructional coach or somebody who comes in and maybe co-teaches or provides some support for some of those students, but that is not a requirement. So if you go from school to school, it may look a little bit different in terms of who's actually in that classroom, but from a general teaching standpoint, those special education teachers in separate settings are qualified and licensed to deliver that instruction. And so it may be very rare that you see another teacher in there co-teaching with them. The older that they get, it changes because licensure changes. If you think about it this way, elementary school teachers, they're generalists. They're teaching the basic foundational things. As you get into middle school and high school, you have to specialize more because there's no way someone's going to be an expert in algebra and an expert in biology and an expert in English and language arts. So teachers specialize. And so the older your children get, the likelihood that they're going to have a special ed teacher that holds qualifications in every single subject, the likelihood is going to get reduced exponentially. And so at your middle school and high school, you may see another teacher co-teaching in a special ed classroom because of the fact that they have to have someone who's what they call highly qualified in that content area.
Why are progress notes on IEP goals so vague? And how can we improve feedback on the progress of my child? I really like that question. Just so you know. Who's going to be the brave one?
Well, I agree that on our IEP progress notes, the way that they're set up, it is vague. I can remember as a resource teacher, a parent coming to me and saying, I want more information. And when I heard what that person wanted, I shared what the level that they wanted. I think it's all about having those conversations with those teachers and saying to them, I want more information. And I think most of the time they'll give you that. They're busy and the drop-down menus on the IEPs are just certain things, and so it kind of happens that way. But if you want more information, you certainly need to ask.
What they were saying also is, while there's a drop-down feature, you also the teachers do have the option to type in specific comments about how your child is performing. And so that first question that I would have is, whenever the schools have their parent-teacher conferences, typically they come right after the report card. And so the first thing that I would do is at my parent-teacher conference, schedule time to speak with the exceptional children's teacher and say, look, I'm looking at my child's goals or their progress notes, and all I got was progressing at a sufficient rate to reach their goals. And then I would ask for more information and say, this is the type of thing that I'm looking for. Is there a way that you can inform me about my child's progress in more depth, and begin giving me more information on those progress notes? That way you have a better idea of how your child is performing.
Can I request speech therapy, occupational therapy progress notes on a certain frequency as part of my child's IEP if I feel each quarter is not frequently enough?
Well, I mean, the law basically says it's as often as the report card. I think that's a discussion that you can have with your teacher, your therapist, that, with the different individuals. Part of it, as you're going through the 9 weeks, the main thing is people should be keeping some type of progress monitoring. They should be keeping the data on how your child is doing on the specific skills that they're working on. So there should be some additional information besides progress notes. And that might be, I know the world of email is there, and I know lots of times people email things back and forth and get some information that way. So it doesn't always have to be a face-to-face meeting. But again, I would have the conversation with the parent, or with the therapist and with the teachers about, what are your expectations? The bottom line is, what do you think you're not getting? And what do you feel that you need? And this should be an ongoing conversation. It should not just be, you have an annual review, we're required to do it by law, but there is that communication that has to be ongoing. And so just keep that in mind as you work with the school system.
I just wanted to chime in that it's good if you can get it written in the IEP, but it's a whole lot more about building relationships with a teacher or with a therapist. Putting something on paper to make somebody do something isn't always as effective as developing a relationship with someone who spends a majority of the day with your child. And it's nice if you can get in the IEP, but I think it's a whole lot more important that you have a relationship with the school and with the teacher than focusing on it's in the IEP, so you have to do it. It should be, we're working together for my child, so we want to do it.
What are, if any, budget issues with special education classes? My son's special ed teacher tells me that she doesn't have the necessary resources or money. What can be done about this?
From a budget standpoint, there's a budget crunch everywhere when you look at just the status of our economy and general schools as a whole. But one thing I always say is that budget does not dictate the services and supports that students with disabilities receive, or students in general. I think, with the budget being the way that it is, there is less instructional materials and supplies that are out there. Typically, your classroom teachers receive instructional materials and supplies through their schools, and the Exceptional Children's Department enhances what they have in their particular classroom, because what we always say is that they are teachers first, they are exceptional children's teachers second. And so the same types of supports that your general ed classroom is receiving are those same supports that they're receiving, and then they're receiving more from the Exceptional Children's Department. So my wife was a teacher, and she would always say, I don't have enough, I want more, because they want to have everything that they feel that they need to meet the needs of those individual students. But budget is not the driving factor in terms of the supports that are provided